What's going on, guys, and welcome back. So the Stitch set championships are all but in the books at this point, and we have some data to go over what decks performed the most. Also, later today I will be streaming. We're going to do our monthly giveaway for the Patreons, so you have a little bit of time left to still get in on that. Link down below. All of your Patreon contributions directly go back into the channel to help fund giveaways such as this one. But we are here to talk about these set championships, what decks dominated, what decks did the best, and doesn't really surprise anyone, does it? Ruby Amethyst came out the top deck. So I only looked at top fours, so like just the decks that got their stitches. And again, this is incomplete because not all the information is out there. People were sharing with me via Facebook, like their locals, what topped and everything like that, which I appreciate. People on YouTube were helping me out, which again, I appreciate everyone who helped. The 3 tournaments I went to, I have dated into here, and also everything we could find on inkdex.com, which is a great place to find tournament results and everything like that. So Ruby Amethyst came through with 94 out of the 387 tops that we found. Again, only top 4s, not top 8s. Don't care about that. 24% of the pie chart. So that's actually not terrible. Like the last 2 formats, they've been above that 30% mark. Or like early in this format, last format, they were above that 30% mark. And this deck has just been so good for so long. And I think a big part of it, it's not that it's crazy good into anything. It's just not bad into anything. Like this deck can win or lose versus just about any deck out there. And that just makes it really scary because it's so consistent and good at really all stages of the game. So Ruby Amethyst comes through as the number 1 deck. I picked this as my 3rd best deck for you guys to win your set championships. It ended up proving me wrong, unfortunately. I was hoping some of these other decks would have more wins. Not surprised that Ruby Amethyst had the most tops. It did come through also, though, with the most first place finishes. Emerald Steel Discard. This was the deck I picked to be number 2, and lo and behold, it is number 2. 62 total tops, 24 total first places. They took up 16% of the pie chart. So the deck kind of, revolving around things like Ursula and Prince John to be able to just do so much damage to your opponent. Like double singing Let the Storm Rage on to deal 4 damage and draw 2 cards is really, really strong. Double singing Sudden Chill to discard 2 and draw 2 is really strong. And who would have ever thought double singing Friends to draw 4 is really, really strong. You add in the other discard outlets from the Steel or from the Emerald deck in with some powerful things from the Steel deck such as Robin Hood, along came Zeus, and you have yourself a very strong meta deck. We're also going to be going through very soon and talking about decks and optimizing a lot of these decks based on topping information, which we'll briefly go over towards the end of this video to help everyone who's going to Atlanta, who's going to Chicago, prepare for these events. Actually, Chicago, I think the new set's going to be ready or legal for, so it's going to change a whole bunch if that is the case. But for Atlanta, for sure, we're going to do our best to help you guys prepare and test and do all that you can do to do well there. So the 3rd best deck is the deck I picked to be number 1, and Ruby Amethyst, I don't know if I said they had 32 wins, first place finishes. Dime Control did have 23, so they were close, being 3rd, only 9 behind. The top 3 within 9 wins, I feel like, is a pretty healthy little trio at the top of the pie chart. 53 total tops, 14 total percent. Not a whole lot to say here. This deck starts out a little slow and ramping, but this deck has probably the best long game out of any deck in the game. It just struggles versus like those aggro decks, and oddly enough, they only had 8 second place finishes, at least that are known again, but they really piled in top 4s and first place finishes. Steel Song ends up in 4th, and they had 13 wins to go into their 40 total tops, 10% of the pie chart. I picked them to be 4, so hey, we're looking pretty good. Our top 4 decks finished in the top 4, flip-flop 1 and 3, and we had them in the right order even. So, 50% got 2 wrong. Amethyst, Emerald, Tempo. This one's kind of interesting because if you actually add in Amethyst Emerald discard, and Amethyst Emerald aggro. If you add all three of them, they actually had 41 total tops, and they'd go ahead of Steel Song. But if we're going to do that, then I guess you got to put Tiana aggro, the Steel Amber deck, their one top in, and then that deck also, 41 tops. So Green Purple and Amber Steel both had a total of 41 tops, but we split up the song and we split up the other variations of Green Purple because they just kind of play so differently. Tempo, you're focused on board presence, your board control. You can go aggro early if you open right. Otherwise, you're not necessarily playing aggro. You just have the ability to. That's why I love this deck so much. It's the deck that I actually piloted to getting my Stitch. So Amethyst Emerald Tempo, it's a deck that if you're against like hyper aggro, you can like race them and actually win. But you also don't have to, because you can control the mid game and the board presence so well in that matchup. But you can do it in other matchups too. And something like Steel Song, which is probably one of the lesser matchups, it's actually, especially if you're on the play, very winnable. You forego the aggro portion and you get the big bodies on board. You get the cards that don't die to grab your swords on board. You bounce and recycle your Ursula. Like, this deck has just so much utility. It's kind of like Ruby Amethyst in the fact that it doesn't necessarily have bad matchups. I'd say Mufasa is probably one of the worst matchups for it, but at the same time, again, that's very winnable still. Sapphire Steel can get awkward if you kind of fall behind or you don't have a good early start, but again, that's a matchup where you can get to 10 before they really even get playing, and then you just kind of pivot the play after that. Steel Song too, again, winnable, not necessarily favorable, but so it's kind of like Ruby Amethyst, but I think not quite the strong late game and not quite as good at board control as Ruby Amethyst. But 32 total tops, 8% of the pie chart, and they did end up coming through with 9 wins. We had them pegged as our 6th best deck for these events, by the way. Obviously, they finished one ahead at 5. So, Sapphire Steel wheel, 24 total tops. They had 7 total wins and 6% of our pie chart. Yeah, there's not a whole lot else to say here. You ramp a bunch and you fishbone quill, you dump your hand, you wheel, you get a whole new hand, and you just play a long grind game. And you have things like Cogsworth with resist. They incorporated Lucky Diamond here with like Bell, and some were playing Tamatoa but not super popular. And the deck just performs really well. Purple Steel, this was my kind of surprise pick that I guess I don't want to say surprise because I'm not surprised it's in the top 7. I actually put this as my 5th best deck for the set championships, so they kind of performed a little lower than I expected. If they were 5 and you bump Sapphire Steel and Tempo each up 1, I would have been right. But we flip-flop Diamond, Ruby, Amethyst, and then we take Purple Steel and move them from 5 to 7 and bump 5 and 6 up, and we're actually still doing pretty good on our predictions. Our top 7 decks were the top 7 decks, but Purple Steel, this isn't Jafar either. It's just Purple Steel control, kind of like set 2 with a few new tools into the Inklands like your Along Came Zeus. They had 6 total wins, 6%, 22 total tops. The deck just performed really well, and I know, like I said, myself personally, not surprised whatsoever. The number 8 deck was actually the deck we also said was going to be number 8. Mufasa, 15 tops, 4%, and they did manage a couple wins. This deck just puts out characters, takes advantage of things like Mufasa, Perdita, and a bunch of other just really good characters in the amber color to just overwhelm your opponent and take complete control of the board. And then they have the late game threats of like Tremaine, Medusa. I mean, Maui's more of a mid game, but like Maleficent Monstrous Dragon from the ruby color. The biggest surprise of this entire event, I think, well, depends who you ask. If you ask Superior Synergy Games, check him out on YouTube. He is an absolutely incredible guy. I got to play him in one of my set championships. We talked. He's like, oh, are you actually with the channel? And he followed the channel. And then he was telling me about his, and I was like, that's actually really crazy. I put your video into my save for later. So we just had a really good talk. Blurple. Blurple was, in my opinion, the surprise of the set championships. I did my top 10, and I actually debated putting them in it, but I left them out. He commented on the video and said, what about Blurple? Well, I was wrong. You were right. I can't say anything enough about it. Blurple did come through with 11 tops, taking up 3% of the set championship pie chart. We had Jafar at number 10. Well, it wasn't Jafar, but Bucky discard came through with 9 tops. I did split off Bucky discard from the Emerald Steel discard because of the fact that Emerald Steel doesn't really focus on the big Floodborn characters like Tinkerbell, Cinderella, and even Sad Beast to a degree, whereas Bucky discard really does put them in, and the Donald Ducks, and potentially like the Flynn Rider, my own biggest fan. So I thought there was a big enough discrepancy between the two that I wanted to split Bucky discard from the Emerald Steel discard. So Green Steel did have 71 total tops, taking up 18% of the pie chart. Jafar Wheel came in at number 11. It was our number 10 deck. 7 tops, 2%, and a few wins. It didn't really come up until like midway through the set championships, but Amethyst Emerald Discard actually became a really popular deck. And I played this at one of my championships. I felt like it just, I don't know, it felt like people were too ready for it because of how popular Green Steel Discard was. And for that reason, to me, it just kind of fell flat. I felt Tempo was the better deck, so I went back to Tempo the day after, and we obviously got our Stitch, so I completely stand by that call. I think discard's fun, and I think there's a lot of potential going forward. I think it just needs a little bit more tweaking, and I'm excited to see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised to see Amethyst Emerald discard do really well in Atlanta once, because we get a few more weeks now to optimize the deck and truly figure it out. The deck that we had at number 9 finished at number 13. Yep, that's 13. Bucky was 10. Jafar 11. Discard 12. Amethyst Emerald Aggro. I felt like I had to put an aggro deck into it, and I thought this deck would do better than Jafar, so we put them ahead of them. They did have 4 tops, technically 1%, as well as Amber Amethyst Hyper Aggro. Actually really like that deck too. They had 4 tops. Emerald Ruby. You almost could argue this was the biggest surprise of the set championships. They had 3 tops. I mean, I'm going to go with 11 and like 4 wins with Blurple because that was just, I thought the deck was good, but the deck is really good. Blurple, another deck to really watch out for in Atlanta. Pirates had 1. Tiana Aggro had 1. And if you're wondering, you can go down below. If you go below the all of the little TCG links, I mean, if you want to help support the channel, there's all that good stuff right there. However, if you go a little bit further below, there is our link to the spreadsheet. It'll bring you to the page that looks just like this. As these other events come up, depending how big the events are, sometimes we will track top 8 and top 16. Top 16 we track for events over 100 players. Top 8 for events over 40. You might say there was events for set championships that were over 40 players. You're absolutely right, and I may go through and add in these categories for them. At least for now, though, for the sake of this video, I wanted to focus on the top 4s. So that's why we only filled out the top 4s. But I'll probably go through Inkdex and look at those tournaments that had 40 players. I don't think any set championship at 100 players, but we will fill in the top 8 category there. So we can see all the different decks here. They're top 16s, 8s, 4s, 2s, first place. Total tops got the number right up in here, and the overall representation. Obviously, you don't need the YouTube link. You're already here. Editor's notes if you're wondering how we figure things out. And then lastly, we'll keep a running tier list over here, just based on how well decks are performing. Trying to kind of keep them in order as well. Tier 2 is getting kind of big. It's getting crowded. There's a few decks that are proving, like Bucky Discard, Jafar Wheel, Blurple all moved their way up into Tier 2, and they're like, hey, don't forget that we exist. We are decks that you have to remember. And then at the bottom, I mentioned how we'd talk about it later. I have these tabs. I got 40 more decks or deck lists to put in here. I'm using like first and second place finishes. I'm probably going to go dig for the Mufasa ones again because I don't have a tab for it, but it does have 5 tops now. So I feel like 5's at the point where it's like, okay, let's go ahead and put it in. I also started or will be starting an Amethyst Emerald discard one because I do expect that to pick up and do more moving forward. So we'll add that tab and Mufasa at some point this week. But otherwise, I think I just have Tempo and Blurple to fill in the data for. Otherwise, the rest of them are all filled in. So you click Ruby Amethyst Control, right? We see all the cards that first and second place finishes are playing. What ratios do they play them at? How many played it at 1, 2, 3, 4, the total percent that played that card, and then the most common ratio that that card was played at. If you look a little further to the right, you will see what percent, or not what percent, but the cards that 100% of the list played. So every first and second place list that we saw had these cards in it, at least to some degree. It doesn't mean they're 4-ofs, but they were in the deck to some degree. I do want to say too, like some of the lists, because on ink decks they go ahead and they add more tournaments later that were certain dates. I do go through and audit and check the total tops, but because I don't write down every single event that I did check decks for, those previous events that get added in late, I don't add the deck lists here just because I don't want to double up and count a singular deck twice. I just do this periodically with new decks. When I go through, I just screenshot like 50 at a time and then add them in. So anyway, if you go down right here, then we put a sample list. This sample list is based on cards that are played at least 50% of the time, the most common ratio that they're played at, and we throw this sample list together. I'm not saying this is the best list. I'm not saying you should play this list. I don't think anybody actually played this exact list. However, I think it's a very, very good starting point. Go play this list, test it out, see what you like, what you don't like, and make your changes as needed. Hopefully this video helped you guys out a lot. I thought it was pretty interesting how the set championships worked out. I'm excited to see what the next one's going to be. And like I said, guys, we're going to do a lot of content to help get ready for Atlanta. Like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and thank you for watching.